Well, the longer I work with this robot, the more I learn. When you are programming the robot, you're probably going to be starting and stopping your code many times over. And these robots use little motors to move all of the joints. And there's a setting called stiffness, how much the motors will resist any attempt to change them physically, and how strong they are if they're lifting something, like lifting his whole body up or lifting something with an arm. If the stiffness is high for a long time, the motors get hot, especially in the hips and the knees, I believe, something in the legs. So I'm going to do the first task step by step, but I want you to notice that I'm also going to be emphasizing how to keep the robot from overheating, because it takes time to write code, it takes time to test code, and the poor little robot doesn't want to sit there kind of holding itself in some sort of strange tense muscle configuration for very long. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is connect to the robot. He should be up far enough for me to connect to. So again, his IP address is there. I've used this so many times, it just connects. And he shows the robot in no particular position yet, because the robot isn't done booting. Now he is. And he comes up in autonomous mode, ready to listen to commands and try to find my face. Hello now. There you are. So I'm going to turn that off. He'll assume a crouch position, and he relaxes most of the muscles pretty well, or the motors, the muscles. I want him to start this first task in this position because he's less likely to fall over. So in my program over here, I'm going to go to, let's see, is it under movement, posture, and I'm going to say go to posture. That way my program always starts with him in the same position. And I'll click on the little wrench and say I want you to start in the crouch position. All right. That's going to be my first command. Then, this is the new thing that I've learned, is I'm going to tell the motors to relax. So there's this thing called set stiffness. I don't want to set the stiffness all the way down to 0, because he might just turn into a big old jellyfish and flop to the ground. So once he's in that posture, I want him to turn all of the motors down to about 10% stiffness. That should be enough to hold him in place without getting so loosey-goosey that he just sort of falls down. The other thing that I've learned is that now that I've got him in this low stiffness mode, let me go ahead and run that. You might see him relax a little bit when I do this. Okay. I can actually hear the motors a little bit here, but they shouldn't be really pushing hard, trying to hold him in position. So let's go ahead and break this link like that. And then I want him to pay attention to his touch sensors on his head and on his toes. So let's go ahead and add some sensors here. So I have to go to sensing. There it is. Touch sensing. And the ones on his toes are called the bumpers. I'll bring that out. And of course the head. Like that. I'll put the head one up here and the bumpers right below it, like so. And once he's done setting the stiffness, I want him to start listening to the sensors on his head, but also at the same time listen to the sensors on his toes, like that. So what do we have him do now? I guess the first thing we want him to do is to raise his arms. Well, the stiffness right now is set pretty low, so let's go back to the stiffness setting here. And of course, if there are much more proficient choreography users out there, they're probably wondering, why are you doing this? This is just all I know right now, so copy, paste. So I've got stiffness here, and if the front sensor is touched, I'm going to change the stiffness. Actually, if any of the head sensors are touched, I'm going to change the stiffness, and I'll put it back at full stiffness, 100% like that. If either toe is pushed, same thing. I want it to set the stiffness back up to 100%. And then I want it to raise its arms. Well, to raise its arms means I need to create a timeline. So I'm going to right click, create a new box, timeline, and I'll call the first one raise, like that. So after the stiffness is set here, raise your arms. How do I do that? So I'm going to double click so I can see the timeline. And I like to run things a little slower than the default rate of 25 frames a second. I find that it makes him move less violently, and he's less likely to spin his arms so fast that he knocks himself over. So I'm going to go to 10 frames a second. And then at 15 frames, so that's 1.5 seconds into this timeline, I want to move his arms around. So let me bring the robot view out here where we can see it a little better. And I'm going to click on a shoulder right there. And whoops, I did not want you to go there, sorry. There we go. The inspector is showing, good, so I can see these things. The stiffness is not red, so if I click this, now it's red, it's good and stiff. I'm going to click on mirroring, and I'm going to lift his shoulder. By lifting his right shoulder, I'll be lifting his left shoulder as well, since I'm mirroring. And I'm going to put that up good and high. Oh, that's behind his head. I don't want that. Come back. Yeah, stay right there. Now, I've clicked the mirroring, so it should be putting into this thing over here that he's going to do both shoulders. That should be the first position of our little robot when he raises his arms. All right. That's it. That's all I want him to do. Raise your arms. So let's go back to the root program here. Oh, you're up here now. Here we go. And I've got to do the same thing when you touch his toes. He's got to lower his arms. So let's copy this. Oh, I did a cut. Control V, get him back. Did he save my stuff? Yeah, good. Copy, paste. I thought I copied and pasted. Copy, paste. There it is. And let's link this in. The stiffness was set. That. And then for this one, I need to change the timeline because I don't want that there anymore. So right click, cut that, make sure the timing is still 10 frames a second, good. At this point, I want his arm down. So again, I'm going to click on his shoulder and I'm going to put his arm back down. Right about there. All right. And that's all I want that particular timeline to do. So right now, he will start in the crouched position. He'll relax his motors a bit. If I touch his head, he'll stiffen up and raise his arms. And when he's done doing that, I want him to go back and relax and wait for me to touch his head again. Let me get this out of the way so you can see that better. If I touch his toes, I want to stiffen up. I want to lower his arms, and then I want him to go back and relax and come around and wait for me to either touch his head or touch his toes again. And this program will run forever. I don't have any way to get out of this program right now. I'll just have to hit stop on my choreography screen up here. So let's test it. Here we go. We're going to start our program. He's in his crouch position. And if you saw that on the code, the head and the bumpers are now waiting. So if I touch up here, any one of the three sensors here, he stiffened up, raised his arms, now he relaxed. And I was watching to see if his arms begin to fall. If I touch his head again, he stiffened up, and then he relaxed. If I touch one of the toes, it's back down, and he relaxes a bit. And he is holding his arms up, so there has to be a little bit of stiffness in the arms to make that work. Up, and back down. Simple enough. Very simple first task. Now I mentioned in the scoring for this task that you'll get 90% if you get it to do this. I want full points, so I want to mess with the color of his eyes while he does this. So I'm going to hit stop. And he should still have his stiffness set at 10%. I want to have his eye color change. Well, the LEDs can be controlled as well. So I'm going to go into LEDs, and I'm going to go to eye LEDs. And I need to slip that in right before he raises his arms here. So I'm going to try to click on just this link, delete it, move this over a smidge, put this up here. I'm running out of space. Like that. And then in this, you can specify whether both eyes, one eye or the other eye, are going to be lit and how long it'll take to light them up. And if I double click here, I can pick the color. So when his arms go up, let's make his eyes go, how about yellow? Does that work? Yellow eyes. Like that. Go back to the program here. I'm going to copy that and paste it. And I'm going to do the same thing for his toes. So I'm going to break this link, move that over, slip that up here. Do-de-do-de-do. But if you touch his toes, I want his eyes to change to a different color. So let's have those change to, how about blue? That. There we go. Let's run that program. Gets into the crouch position, touch his head, touch his toe, and his eyes are still blue. That's all right. I'll go ahead and hit stop. I think I would like a way to end the program. So I'm going to add one more sensor in here, and that is if you touch his right hand. How about that? If you touch his right hand, he'll go ahead and end the program. So let's go to sensing. And there's the right hand, so I'll grab that. There we go. If I double click on that, you can see there's a bunch of things here. There's actually 3 different sensors for his hand. There's one on the left side of his hand, the back of his hand, and the right side. Who knew? So once I get all set up again, I'm going to come down here like that and wait for you to touch his hand. Then if you do touch his hand, I want to set the stiffness again. So I'll copy this, copy, paste. And that should still be setting it all the way up. And no matter which part of his hand you touch, he'll stiffen up. And I want him to go back to his beginning posture. So I'll go copy and paste. Oh, I didn't mean to double click there, sorry. Like that. Stop it. And then I want his eyes to go back to white. So I'm going to copy one of these, copy paste. Have his eyes go back to white. All right. So I'll change the color of that to white. And then once he's in that posture, his eyes are back to normal. I want him to relax. So I'm going to go ahead and set the stiffness back to 0, basically. So let's see. We'll copy and paste. I really have run out of room here. I'm going to set the stiffness all the way down to 0. I can actually hear the motors right now. And then I'm going to drag this up here to the on stopped. And that should bring it into my program. And this looks a little cluttered. You could move things around to try to make it look a little prettier. I'm not going to worry about that right now. He's trying his best to make all those little loopy lines fit. So now, if you touch his head, he raises his arms. Touch his toes, he lowers them. If you touch his right hand, he goes back to the beginning posture. That way, if I touch his right hand and his arms are up, he'll bring them down. Sets his eyes back to white, relaxes his entire body, and shuts off the program. So let's give that a go. All right, raise his hands. Lower. Come on, buddy. Hit the other toe. No change really. Touch his head again. And now I'm going to touch his hand. And all the motors are off now. So you know I kind of like this better than hearing those motors even at 10% while he's waiting for you to touch something. I think I'm going to go ahead and change that stiffness at the beginning also to 0. So I'm going to put this back down all the way to 0. Now I'm really curious, if I do that, if he raises his hands, will his hands begin to fall down? Let's find out. All right, I don't hear any motor sounds. Stiffened up. There they go. And there he goes. Oh, so I touched his hand and he went back to that. So that won't work, will it? I have to keep him just a little bit stiffened up for him to keep everything in place. So we'll leave that at 10. That seemed to work okay. One more time. Here we go. Gets into a spot. Can just barely hear the motors kind of fighting. Touch his head. Touch his toe. Touch his hand. Oh, I touched your hand. There he goes. And he's back. All right. That's the first task. I think it's important to pay attention to the motors. Had I not done this, if I'd have left him at full stiffness, which is what he's normally at, for example, if you get him to wake up in this position, the motor stiffness is evident. You can actually hear the motors a little bit. And he'll begin to overheat if you just leave him like this for a while. So that's why I kind of like the rest position down here. where his hands lay on his knees, and he doesn't fall over, he's balanced. Whoever programmed that position did a good job. And the motors can be off right now and he'll be fine. So that's the first task. I hope this is helpful. In fact, I kind of told you how to do the first task. The trick will be, can you do it or personalize it in some way, and not just copy and blindly do it. But there you go. Task number 1, how to manipulate the limbs on the robot. We haven't tried to make him walk or do anything like that. We haven't tried to make him recognize our face or listen to us. Just messing with sensing, with basic touch, and then responding as a result. So that's your first challenge. I hope it goes well.